Welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into a conflict you probably think you know well, the American War of Independence. But we're looking at it through a different lens entirely.
That's right. Forget the land battles for a moment. Our source material today focuses purely on the naval side of things.
And it reveals a war where control of the water wasn't just important, it was often the deciding factor, the casting vote, as our source puts it.
It really changes your perspective. When you track the war this way through naval actions, well, it becomes clear. It's fundamentally a maritime struggle.
Every key moment, from little skirmishes on lakes to huge fleet battles out on the ocean, it all seems to hinge on who controlled the waterways for power projection, for logistics.
Exactly. Who could move troops, who could supply them, who could block the other side from doing the same.
So our mission today is to pull out those strategic lessons, the sometimes surprising outcomes, and really pinpoint those moments where naval power, maybe operating unseen, actually determined the fate of armies on land.
We want to get beyond just saying the Navy was important and understand why. How did specific naval actions, even technical mistakes, seal the deal for entire campaigns?
Right. And to start, you really have to get your head around the sheer complexity the British were facing. This wasn't just some local uprising.
Oh, absolutely not. It was global. You've got North America, obviously, but also the West Indies, crucial sugar islands, naval battles in European waters, and later even the East Indies. It's vast.
And for Britain, an island nation dependent on trade and projecting power overseas. The sea lanes were everything.
They were the communication lines, the supply lines, the battlefields themselves, linking all these scattered fronts. Lose control of the sea, you lose the war. It's that simple.
And the sources we're using point right away to a foundational mistake, a strategic failure right from the get-go back in 1775.
Yes, the failure to apply enough force decisively right at the start.
They sort of underestimated the situation.
Massively. Underestimated the colonial resolve, maybe hampered by political issues back in London, the sheer logistical challenge.
Yeah.
The result was they never really clamped down hard early on.
And the text stresses this point. If you're going to use force, make it count from day one.
Precisely. By using too little force initially, they lost that crucial window, that momentum needed to potentially crush the rebellion before France and others got involved. They spent the rest of the war playing catch-up.
So that initial hesitation, that lack of overwhelming force, it just echoed through the whole conflict.
It really did. It set the stage for escalating problems, bigger interventions, and ultimately the difficulties they faced right up to the end.
Okay, so let's jump right into a place you might not immediately think of as Naval Lake Champlain, 1776. Why was this long, skinny lake so strategically vital?
Lake Champlain. Geographically, it's the absolute key. It's the natural water highway connecting the St. Lawrence River, British Canada in the north, down towards the Hudson River Valley in New York.
So control the lake, control the Hudson.
And you cut the colonies in two. Slice off New England, the heart of the rebellion, from Pennsylvania, Virginia, the rest. That was the core British strategy: isolate and conquer.
But in 1775, early 76, the Americans had actually tried to invade Canada, right? And it had gone badly.
Disastrously. They retreated from Quebec, a city actually saved for the British by the timely arrival of a Royal Navy relief squadron, we should add. The American forces staggered back to Crown Point on Lake Champlain in a terrible state.
The sources mention smallpox, starvation, just utter destitution.
A broken army. But right there, amidst that chaos, you see the importance of individual leadership, specifically Benedict Arnold.
Before his later notoriety, of course.
Yes, at this point, a driven and frankly brilliant commander for the American cause. He saw immediately, even with the army collapsing, that naval control of Lake Champlain was the immediate critical issue.
If the British could just sail south unopposed,
they could land a huge force deep in New York. Game over, potentially.
Sure.
So Arnold, with almost nothing, kicks off a desperate naval arms race right there on the lake.
And his starting fleet was, well, pretty makeshift.
Makeshift is putting it mildly. He scraped together 3 small schooners, a sloop, 5 gondolas, basically large flat-bottom rowboats with a cannon or 2. Pretty pathetic compared to what the British could muster.
But he used them to make a stand, right, to block the lower part of the lake.
Exactly. Just having something there forced the British to respond in kind. And their response was massive, logistically kind of mind-boggling for the time and place.
They brought in hundreds of experienced sailors.
700 regular seamen, the best. And they started building a proper fleet right there in the wilderness, dismantling ships, carrying pieces overland, rebuilding them.
Including a real warship, the Inflexible.
Yes, a ship-rigged vessel, think miniature frigate, with 18 heavy 12-pounder cannons, unheard of on an inland lake, plus 2 powerful schooners, the Maria and Carleton. The difference in firepower was immense.
Plus, the British had the ships, the sailors, the guns. What did Arnold have?
He had the initiative, and he understood the value of time. The British had the superiority, but, and this is the crucial insight from our source, building and assembling that fleet took time, invaluable time. Arnold wasn't fighting to win a naval battle. He was fighting purely for delay.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the Battle of Valcour Island, October 11th, 1776. Arnold knows he's outgunned. He has to choose his ground carefully.
And his choice was tactically brilliant. He anchored his little flotilla in a narrow bay on the west side of Valcour Island, tucked away. He set them up in a crescent formation.
Why there? What was the advantage?
It meant the British couldn't bring all their ships and guns to bear at once. Because of the wind and the shape of the channel, they had to attack from the south, sailing upwind into the bay, piecemeal, losing their formation. It neutralized their numbers.
He turned it into a close-range slugfest, basically.
Exactly. His second-in-command, Waterbury, actually wanted to retreat out into the open lake. He thought they were trapped.
But Arnold overruled him.
Yes. Arnold knew retreating before faster, square-rigged ships with a favorable wind was suicide. Better to fight it out where position mattered more. And fight they did. It was incredibly fierce.
The British ship Carleton took a real beating, didn't it?
A hammering.
Yeah.
Lost almost half her crew killed or wounded. She was only saved by the extraordinary heroism of a young midshipman named Edward Pellew.
Pellew, he becomes a famous admiral later, right? Lord Exmouth.
Very same. This is one of his first defining moments. The Carleton was crippled, drifting under heavy fire. The line used to control her position, the spring, was shot away. Pellew, apparently without orders, dashed out onto the bowsprit, the spar sticking out the front under intense musket fire, grabbed the line, secured it, basically saved the ship from destruction or capture.
Wow, just incredible bravery. So the battle rages, Arnold loses some ships like the Royal Savage, which ran aground. But he holds his position? Then what?
Then comes the escape. After the brutal fighting died down at dusk, Arnold knew he couldn't survive another day. Under the cover of thick fog and the dark night, starting around 7 p.m.
He slips his remaining boats, battered as they were, right through the British line.
Right through. The British fleet was anchored across the southern exit of the bay, feeling, as the source says, secure of the enemy. They weren't patrolling effectively. By morning, Arnold and his flotilla were gone. Vanished.
It's astonishing negligence on the British part, isn't it, given the stakes?
It really is. Complacency, maybe overconfidence, a failure of basic naval watchfulness.
The British pursued, of course.
Oh, yes, furiously. They caught up with Arnold's rear guard 2 days later near Split Rock. Headwinds, battle damage. His remaining boats were doomed. The Galley Congress, Arnold's flagship, and the Washington were cornered.
No way out this time.
No. So Arnold made a final, defiant gesture. He ran his last few vessels ashore, including the Congress and 4 gondolas, and set them ablaze. The source notes he made sure they burned fiercely, refusing to leave until they were guaranteed to blow up with their flags still flying. A nice point of honor, it says.
So he lost most of his fleet, 10 out of 15 vessels destroyed. Tactically, a clear defeat. But strategically.
Strategically. A massive victory. A campaign-altering victory. The fleet was gone, yes. But he had bought the delay he needed.
How much delay are we talking?
Weeks. The time it took the British to build the Inflexible, fight the battle, regroup, it pushed everything back.
Yeah.
By the time the British had undisputed control of Lake Champlain, it was too late in the season to launch the major invasion south and link it with General Howe advancing from New York City. Winter was setting in.
So Arnold's actions prevented the British from achieving their main strategic goal in 1776.
Directly. That failure to link Howe and Burgoyne in 76 forced Burgoyne to try again the next year, 1777. But this time, Howe made a fatal error we'll get to, leaving Burgoyne isolated.
Which led directly to Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga.
Exactly. Saratoga, October 1777, a turning point. It convinced the French to formally ally with the Americans in 1778. And it all traces back to that desperate fight for time, waged with makeshift boats on Lake Champlain, orchestrated by Arnold. Naval action dictating the entire course of the land war. Incredible, really.
Okay, let's shift from those inland waters to the Atlantic coast. Early on, there were some key lessons learned, often the hard way. Charleston, South Carolina, June 1776, a big test for the British Navy against coastal defenses.
Yes, the attack on Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island. Admiral Sir Peter Parker led the assault. The plan looked good on paper: a direct naval bombardment by heavy ships like the 50-gun Bristol and Experiment, plus frigates.
While another group of frigates was supposed to sneak past the fort and hit it from the side, enfilade it.
Right, catch it in a crossfire. Classic naval tactic against a fixed fortification.
Ooh.
But it went wrong, spectacularly wrong.
Partly because of the fort itself, wasn't it? The construction material?
Absolutely. The fort was primarily built from palmetto logs and sand. Palmetto wood is remarkably soft and spongy. When British cannonballs hit it, instead of shattering the logs and sending deadly splinters everywhere, the wood just absorbed the impact. The balls often just buried themselves in the logs.
So the fort could take a pounding much better than expected.
A tremendous pounding. And the American garrison, though low on gunpowder, used what they had very effectively.
How so?
Colonel Moultrie, the commander, made them hold their fire until the British ships were really close, about 350 yards, point-blank range, essentially. So when they did fire, their shots did maximum damage to the ship's hulls and rigging. The British ships took terrible punishment.
And that flanking maneuver, the key part of the plan.
Total failure. Utter disaster due to bad piloting. The 3 frigates assigned Actaeon, Siren, and Sphinx ran aground on a shoal. 2 eventually got off, but the Actaeon was stuck fast.
They couldn't save her.
Nope. They had to evacuate the crew, set her on fire, and abandon her. She blew up later. Apparently, the Americans even managed to row out, board her briefly, and grab her colors before she went. A final insult.
So the main attack wasn't supported, the fort held up, the Americans fought well. A decisive repulse for the British.
A major one. The sailors themselves apparently said, "We never had such a drubbing in our lives." It showed that powerful fleets weren't invincible against well-prepared shore defenses, a huge morale boost for the Americans.
And you mentioned a connection to later naval figures.
Yes, it's interesting how these careers intertwine. A young James Saumarez, later a famous admiral himself, was serving on Parker's flagship, the Bristol, during this drubbing, and got promoted afterwards. And later, Parker, using the same ship, would give promotions to Horatio Nelson and Cuthbert Collingwood. Small world, the Royal Navy.
Okay, let's move north to New York later in 1776, this time a big British success initially.
Yes, the arrival of the Howe brothers generals, Sir William Howe and Admiral Lord Howe. They had a huge force, military power combined with authority as peace commissioners, though the peace effort was dead on arrival after the Declaration of Independence.
Militarily, though, they quickly targeted the weak spot in New York's defenses.
Right, the heights of Brooklyn on Long Island. If you control that high ground, you control Manhattan across the East River. Elementary military geography.
And the Navy played its part perfectly here.
Impeccably. Admiral Howe's fleet, with Commodore Hotham managing the amphibious part, landed about 15,000 British and Hessian troops on Long Island smoothly and efficiently. They outmaneuvered Washington, defeated his forces badly at the Battle of Long Island.
Washington was trapped, wasn't he? His army split, half on Long Island with their backs to the water.
Completely trapped, facing potential annihilation, which makes what happened next even more remarkable. Washington's great escape.
He evacuated something like 9,000 men, plus equipment, cannons, across a mile-wide, fast-flowing tidal river at night in secrecy.
In utter silence, using every boat he could find, rowed by fishermen and soldiers from Massachusetts regiments who knew those waters. A masterpiece of logistics and discipline under immense pressure.
Where was the Royal Navy? They had total command of the waters around New York. How did they miss an entire army escaping right under their noses?
That's the million-dollar question. The source is blunt. It was negligence. Pure and simple naval negligence.
They didn't have patrols out, rowboats listening in the fog.
Apparently not effective ones. No proper water-based lookout using muffled oars. The source argues that while General Howe perhaps didn't press his advantage on land quickly enough, the job of watching the water, especially that crucial escape route, was primarily the duty of the Navy.
Just a few patrol boats could have sounded the alarm.
And brought down disaster on the Americans. It was a colossal failure of vigilance, letting Washington slip away to fight another day. A tactical oversight with huge strategic consequences.
And this pattern of British tactical success, followed by strategic, let's say indecision or error, continues, leading into the critical year of 1777.
It does. After Washington's surprise victories at Trenton and Princeton over Christmas 76 and New Year 77, General Howe pulled his forces back in New Jersey, holding just a couple of key points. The stage was set for the big campaign of 1777. The push from Canada under Burgoyne meant to link up with Howe coming north from New York.
The plan to cut the colonies in two.
Exactly. But then came Howe's fatal decision. Instead of marching north up the Hudson to meet Burgoyne, General Howe decided to capture the American capital, Philadelphia.
Okay, taking the enemy capital seems logical, but how did he decide to get there?
That's the truly baffling part. He decided to transport his entire army by sea, embarking around 14,000 men. But instead of sailing up the Delaware River, which was the direct route to Philadelphia,
He thought it was too dangerous, too many river defenses.
he judged it too obstructed, yes. So he opted for the long sea route, all the way down the coast, around the Delmarva Peninsula, and up the Chesapeake Bay, a massive detour. He sailed from Sandy Hook in late July 1777.
A detour that took him completely out of position to help Burgoyne coming south from Canada.
Completely. It physically severed any possibility of cooperation that year. He prioritized capturing Philadelphia, a secondary objective, strategically over the primary goal of splitting the colonies along the Hudson-Champlain line.
Did anyone realize how disastrous this was at the time?
Washington certainly seemed perplexed. The source quotes him writing that Howe abandoning Burgoyne was so unaccountable a matter that he kept looking over his shoulder, expecting Howe to suddenly turn back and appear on the Hudson.
But Howe kept going to the Chesapeake.
He did. He landed his army, eventually took Philadelphia, but the consequence was inevitable. Burgoyne, struggling through the wilderness, harassed by militia, short on supplies, and crucially, unsupported by Howe,
Was surrounded and forced to surrender his entire army at Saratoga, October 17th, 1777.
the turning point of the war.
Yeah.
And the source is clear. The general failure of that campaign, and arguably the war, was sealed by Howe's decision to use naval transport to pursue a flawed strategy via the Chesapeake, abandoning Burgoyne. A catastrophic strategic blunder enabled, ironically, by British sea power.
Saratoga changes everything. France formally enters the war in 1778. Suddenly, Britain isn't just fighting colonists, they're fighting one of the world's major naval powers again.
A game changer. The naval war escalates dramatically. Almost immediately, a powerful French fleet under the Comte d'Estaing sets sail for North America. This poses an existential threat to the British position.
And the British commander on station is still Admiral Lord Howe, the man whose fleet failed to stop Washington's escape from Long Island. But here, he seems to rise to the occasion.
He absolutely does. Howe recognized the danger instantly. D'Estaing's fleet could potentially trap the British Army, now under Sir Henry Clinton, which was occupying Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Howe acted with incredible speed and decisiveness.
What did he do?
First, he orchestrated the rapid evacuation of the British Army from Philadelphia. Clinton marched them overland across New Jersey towards New York, a risky move in itself. Simultaneously, Howe had to get his fleet, including vulnerable transports loaded with supplies and Loyalist refugees, out of the Delaware River and safely to New York.
He was racing against D'Estaing's arrival.
Literally racing.
Mm-hmm.
And he just barely made it. This is what the source calls the near miss. D'Estaing arrived off the mouth of the Delaware Bay just 10 days after Howe's last ships had cleared it.
10 days. That's incredibly close.
If D'Estaing had caught Howe's fleet and transports in the river, or Clinton's army isolated, the source says it would have been at least the fate of Burgoyne. Total disaster. Howe's speed saved both the army and the fleet.
So Howe gets his ships and the army safely back to the main British base at New York. But D'Estaing follows him there, right? And the French fleet is stronger.
Significantly stronger. D'Estaing arrived off Sandy Hook, the entrance to New York Harbor, with a formidable force, including a 90-gun ship, an 80-gun ship, 6 powerful 74s. Howe's fleet was much weaker, mostly smaller 64s and 50-gun ships. On paper, D'Estaing should have crushed him.
But Howe prepared a very clever defense.
A tactical masterpiece. He anchored his ships in a carefully planned defensive line across the narrow channel at Sandy Hook. And he didn't just rely on numbers. He used tactical innovation. He briefed all his captains thoroughly, ensuring they understood the plan key for coordination.
The source talks about an indented line formation and the use of springs. Can you break those down? They sound technical, but seem crucial here.
They were absolutely crucial. The indented line wasn't just a straight line of ships. Each ship was positioned slightly ahead and slightly seaward of the one behind it. Think of it like overlapping shields.
What did that achieve?
It meant that as the French ships tried to sail into the channel, one by one, they would be exposed to the concentrated broadside fire of multiple British ships simultaneously. They'd be raked from the side as they approached head-on.
Nasty. And the springs, what were they for?
Springs were extra anchor cables attached to the ship's side, usually the bow. Normally, a ship at anchor points into the wind or tide. By hauling on the spring while easing the main anchor cable, the crew could pivot the ship, swing its broadside to face a specific direction without actually moving anchor.
Ah, so even anchored, they could aim their main batteries precisely at the incoming French ships.
Precisely. The French ships, sailing in line ahead, would have very little forward-firing capability, bow chasers. They'd have to endure this devastating angled fire from Howe's anchored ships, ships that could swing their full broadsides to bear before they could even get into a position to fire back effectively. Howe had turned the channel entrance into a death trap.
It sounds like a brilliant piece of naval positioning.
It was. And complementing the tactics was the spirit of the British crews. Howe's men knew they were outnumbered, but they were fired up.
The source mentions volunteers rushing to join the warships.
Yes, the fleet was undermanned, but when Howe called for volunteers from the merchant ships and transports in the harbor, masters, mates, ordinary seamen, they swarmed the warships, eager to fight. So many volunteered that the transport captains barely had enough men left to keep watch on their own vessels. That morale, that all hands to the pump spirit, was vital.
So D'Estaing arrives, sees this formidable defense. What does he do?
He anchors outside the sandbar, studies Howe's dispositions for 11 days, probes the depth of the water on the bar, and ultimately decides it's too risky. The pilots told him his big ships couldn't cross the bar safely, and the defensive setup looked unbreakable.
He just sailed away without even trying.
He sailed away, headed for Rhode Island instead. It was a huge missed opportunity for the French. A decisive attack then could have potentially ended the war by capturing New York and the main British fleet and army. Howe's defense, his tactical genius, and his men's spirit saved the day.
But the confrontation wasn't over. Howe then follows D'Estaing to Rhode Island, even though the French fleet is still superior.
Yes, Howe, reinforced slightly, follows D'Estaing to Narragansett Bay, where the French were now cooperating with an American army besieging the British garrison at Newport. Howe arrived with 13 ships of the line against D'Estaing's 12, but D'Estaing still had bigger, more powerful ships.
And this is where the idea of the fleet in being comes in.
Exactly. Howe's fleet, though perhaps slippily inferior overall, was a credible threat. Its mere presence, its potential to intervene, was enough to force D'Estaing's hand. D'Estaing felt he had to deal with Howe before completing the siege.
So he abandoned the land attack to fight Howe at sea.
He re-embarked his troops and sailed out to meet Howe. But before they could properly engage, a massive gale blew in and scattered both fleets, damaging ships on both sides.
A storm decides it.
In a way.
Yeah.
Afterwards, D'Estaing regrouped, but despite pleas from his American allies to return and finish off the Newport garrison, he decided his fleet needed major repairs and sailed off to Boston, effectively abandoning the siege.
Leaving the Americans high and dry.
Completely. So Howe, through his initial defense at New York and his bold pursuit to Rhode Island, managed to save the British fleet, save New York, and save the Newport garrison, all without a decisive fleet action against a superior enemy force.
Purely through maneuver and presence.
And nerve. The source really praises Howe's equable, unflagging energy and professional skill here. It pushes back hard against critics who just counted guns and ships and said Howe should have done more.
Because factors like ship size, concentration of fire, unified command matter more than raw numbers sometimes.
Absolutely. 3 big ships were often much more effective than, say, 5 smaller ones, even if the total number of guns is similar. They can take more punishment, deliver a heavier punch, and are easier to control as a unit. Howe understood this. D'Estaing perhaps was too cautious. Howe's performance in 1778 was a masterclass in defensive naval strategy.
While Howe was achieving this defensive success in America, things were less impressive back in European waters, weren't they? The Battle of Ushant in 1778 sounds like a bit of a mess.
A mess is a good word for it. It really highlighted how political divisions back home could cripple naval effectiveness. This was the main British Channel Fleet under Admiral Keppel against the French Atlantic Fleet under Comte d'Herville.
Keppel was a Whig, wasn't he? And the Admiralty was run by Tories. Lots of bad blood there.
Exactly. The political climate was poisonous. The battle itself, fought off the coast of France on July 27th, was confused and indecisive. The British line got disordered. Keppel made the signal to engage, but the French managed to pass by on the opposite tack.
And then came the notorious Palliser controversy. Who was Palliser?
Sir Hugh Palliser was Keppel's third in command, commanding the rear division of the fleet. And he was a prominent Tory politician, very much opposed to Keppel politically.
So what happened? Or rather, what didn't happen?
After the initial pass, Keppel wanted to reform his line and re-engage. He hoisted the signal for the line of battle. But Palliser's division, the rear of the fleet, failed to rejoin the main body promptly. They sort of lagged behind.
Deliberately. Was he sulking?
That was the accusation. Keppel certainly suspected it. He felt Palliser wasn't making enough effort to get back into position. Palliser claimed his ship was too damaged, but he failed to signal this effectively to Keppel. Whether it was deliberate obstruction due to politics, incompetence, or genuine damage that wasn't communicated, the result was the British fleet remained disorganized.
Keppel waited, the French slipped away, and the battle ended inconclusively.
Right. It led to courts-martial for both Keppel and Palliser. Both were largely acquitted, but Palliser was censured for not informing the admiral of his ship's condition. The whole affair left a very bitter taste and showed how infighting could hamstring the fleet.
Was there a practical lesson learned from that tactical confusion?
Yes, an important one about signals and command. Keppel later issued a specific order. In future, the line is always to be taken from the center, meaning ships should form up based on the commander-in-chief's position in the center, not relative to their own divisional commander in the van or rear.
To prevent that kind of fragmentation again.
Exactly. To ensure the fleet acted as one unit under the admiral's direct control, not as separate squadrons potentially following their own agendas.
Okay, so while the Channel Fleet was dealing with political drama, the Admiralty clearly needed someone effective elsewhere. They turned to Admiral George Rodney, sending him to the West Indies.
Yes, Rodney was appointed to the Leeward Islands Station in late 1779. He was known as a much more aggressive, perhaps less politically constrained, commander. His first task, though, was vital. Relieve the British fortress of Gibraltar, which was under siege by the Spanish.
And he didn't waste any time making an impact on the way there.
Not at all. Almost immediately after sailing off Cape Finisterre, he ran into a large Spanish convoy heading for Cadiz. He captured the entire convoy, 15 merchantmen loaded with supplies, plus their escort. A brand-new 64-gun Spanish ship of the line, the Guipuzcoano, and 6 frigates. A huge haul.
A great start, but then he had an even bigger success just a bit later.
Just over a week later, off Cape St. Vincent, the southwestern tip of Portugal, in moonlight and rough weather, he encountered a Spanish squadron of 11 ships of the line, commanded by Admiral Don Juan de Langara.
And Rodney went right after them.
Immediately, he ordered a general chase, basically telling his fastest ships to hunt down the enemy individually as they could catch them. Crucially, he maneuvered to get between the Spanish and their intended safe port of Cadiz, cutting off their retreat.
What was the result?
A decisive victory. It became known as the Moonlight Battle. Rodney's fleet captured Admiral Langara himself, along with 4 Spanish ships of the line. Another Spanish 74 blew up during the action, and 1 more was wrecked. Only 4 Spanish ships escaped. It was a stunning success, a huge morale boost for Britain.
So Rodney relieves Gibraltar, resupplies Minorca, and finally gets to the West Indies, ready to take on the French fleet there, now under the Comte de Guichen.
Right. And their first major encounter off Martinique on April 17, 1780, really highlights Rodney's attempt to break away from the old, rigid tactics.
He wanted to concentrate his force, didn't he? Not just fight ship to ship down the line.
Precisely. The French had the weather gauge, the advantageous upwind position, and were sailing in line ahead. Rodney, coming up from leeward, saw an opportunity. He wanted to concentrate his entire fleet's fire onto the rear portion of the French line, overwhelming them before the French van could even get involved.
A potentially devastating tactic. How did he signal that?
He used the signal book. He made the signal for every ship to bear down and steer for her opposite in the enemy's line. His intention was that his leading ship should attack the corresponding ship in the French rear, the second ship attack the next one up, and so on, clustering his attack.
But that's not what happened. The lead British captain, Carkett, misunderstood. This is the Carkett blunder.
Exactly. Captain Robert Carkett, commanding the leading ship HMS Stirling Castle, was a very senior captain, steeped in the old ways. The traditional interpretation of that signal, ingrained by decades of the official fighting instructions, was to engage your direct opposite number if the fleets were parallel.
But they weren't parallel. Rodney was trying something different.
Right. Carkett, perhaps confused or just rigidly adhering to the old doctrine, interpreted her opposite as the ship directly opposite him in the French line overall, which happened to be de Guichen's flagship near the center of the French line, far ahead of the intended target area in the rear.
So Carkett sailed off towards the French center.
Yes, leading the entire British van away from the point of concentration Rodney intended. Instead of crushing the French rear, the British attack got strung out along the whole French line, resulting in exactly the kind of indecisive parallel ship-to-ship cannonade that Rodney was trying to avoid.
He must have been furious.
Livid. The source mentions a private letter Rodney wrote, suppressed by the Admiralty at the time, where he absolutely ripped into Carket for misunderstanding the signal and ruining the plan. It shows the immense difficulty commanders like Rodney faced in trying to implement more flexible, decisive tactics against the dead weight of established doctrine and perhaps the inflexibility of some subordinates. He was ahead of his time, anticipating tactics Nelson would later perfect.
Okay, all these threats, the importance of naval control, the strategic errors, the tactical blunders, the French intervention, they all converge now on the decisive campaign of the entire war, Yorktown, 1781.
This is where it all comes crashing down for the British. And it starts yet again with that fundamental strategic error.
Splitting the forces.
Exactly. The British command, both in London and America, repeated the mistake of 1777, but on an even grander scale. They tried to wage major campaigns simultaneously in the north, around New York, and in the south, the Carolinas and Georgia. This divided their land forces and stretched their naval resources dangerously thin.
And this strategy is what ultimately leads General Cornwallis, after campaigning through the Carolinas, into Virginia and getting cornered at Yorktown on the peninsula.
Precisely. He marched into Virginia, hoping to consolidate British control, cut supply lines, maybe link up with forces from New York. But he ended up in a strategic dead end at Yorktown, critically dependent on the Royal Navy controlling the Chesapeake Bay to supply him or evacuate him if necessary.
So everything hinges on naval control of the Chesapeake. And then comes the second fatal error. The British Naval Command failed to concentrate their own fleet at the decisive point.
Right. It's a story of bad timing, bad judgment, and bad luck with communications. The British naval commander in North America at that moment was Admiral Thomas Graves, who was based in New York. Admiral Hood arrived from the West Indies with a powerful squadron, but Graves was actually away.
Away? Where did he go?
He'd sailed north towards Boston, hoping to intercept a small French convoy expected there. This was despite specific warnings from the Admiralty to be extremely vigilant and keep his fleet concentrated at New York, because a major French fleet under Comte de Grasse was expected on the coast.
So Graves was out of position when the real threat materialized?
Critically out of position.
Yeah.
And compounding the problem, vital intelligence got lost or delayed. Dispatches warning Graves about the sheer size of de Grasse's fleet, carried by fast frigates like the Swallow and Active, didn't reach him in time. He simply didn't grasp the magnitude of the crisis heading for the Chesapeake.
Meanwhile, the French commander, de Grasse, he understood the stakes, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Grasse received urgent pleas from Washington and Rochambeau, commander of the French army in America, to bring his entire West Indies fleet north and strike a decisive blow. And he took that request incredibly seriously.
He didn't just send a detachment, he brought the whole fleet.
Pretty much. He sailed from Cap Francois in Haiti, made a risky but brilliant decision to head directly for the Chesapeake, and arrived inside the bay, anchoring in Lynnhaven Bay near Cape Henry on August 30th, 1781. He brought 28 ships of the line initially, later reduced to 24, as he sent some to blockade the rivers.
24 French ships of the line already inside the bay. What did he do immediately?
He immediately landed 3,000 French troops to reinforce Lafayette, who was shadowing Cornwallis. And crucially, he sent French frigates and cruisers up the James and York rivers, effectively sealing off Cornwallis's only water escape routes. Cornwallis was bottled up before the main Allied armies even arrived overland.
So Graves finally gets back to New York, joins forces with Hood. How many ships did they have?
They mustered 19 ships of the line, significantly outnumbered by the 24 de Grasse had inside the bay. But they sailed south immediately, hoping to surprise the French, force their way in, and relieve Cornwallis. They arrived off the Chesapeake Capes on the morning of September 5th.
And found the French fleet coming out to meet them. This is the Battle of the Chesapeake, or the Battle of the Capes, the naval battle that decided the war.
Absolutely. And it was decided by yet another British tactical blunder, this time by Admiral Graves.
What did Graves do wrong? How did he set up his fleet?
As the French fleet emerged from the bay, somewhat disorganizedly, Graves had the opportunity to attack them as they came out. Instead, he signaled for his fleet to form a line of battle ahead, roughly parallel to the French. He then made a crucial flawed signal for the leading ships, the van, to lead more towards the enemy to close the distance.
Okay, sounds reasonable. What was the problem with that?
The problem was how the van closed the distance. Because the fleets weren't perfectly parallel, the British van angled in towards the French van, while the British center and rear had to maintain the line behind them. This created what's called an oblique line.
Meaning only the front part of the British line actually got into effective fighting range.
Exactly. The leading British ships in the van got heavily engaged, taking severe damage from the corresponding French ships. But the British center, where Graves was, and especially the rear division under Admiral Hood, were angled away, too far off to fire effectively. Hood's powerful squadron barely fired a shot.
It sounds like Carkett's blunder again, but on a fleet level, adhering too rigidly to the line formation, even when it prevented most of the fleet from fighting.
Very similar in consequence. Hood, in the rear, felt bound by the signal for the line of battle and didn't feel authorized to break formation and go to the van's support, even though they were getting hammered. Graves failed to adjust the signals for the formation to bring his whole force to bear.
The source compares this to Admiral Byng's notorious failure at Minorca decades earlier, doesn't it?
Explicitly. The same kind of tactical paralysis, sacrificing the chance for a decisive blow for the sake of maintaining a perfect but ineffective line. Hood was furious afterwards, writing about the truly lamentable state they were in due to Graves's handling of the fleet.
So the battle was tactically inconclusive in terms of ships lost, but strategically.
Strategically, a disaster for the British. Their fleet was more damaged than the French, particularly the van. They were unable to dislodge de Grasse from the entrance to the Chesapeake. And while they were maneuvering indecisively for a few days afterwards, another French squadron under de Barras arrived from Newport, Rhode Island.
Reinforcements for de Grasse.
Yes, de Barras slipped into the Chesapeake, bringing the heavy siege artillery needed to bombard Yorktown. Now, de Grasse had an overwhelming 36 ships of the line inside the bay.
Against Graves' damaged 19 outside. No contest.
None whatsoever. Graves held a council of war, recognized the situation was hopeless, and sailed back to New York, abandoning Cornwallis to his fate.
And with the French Navy firmly in control of the Chesapeake, blocking any rescue or escape by sea, and the combined American and French armies under Washington and Rochambeau besieging him on land.
Cornwallis had no choice. He was trapped. He surrendered his entire army on October 19, 1781.
The source is absolutely emphatic about the cause, isn't it?
Unequivocal. It states directly that the naval command of the Chesapeake Bay, secured by de Grasse and lost by Graves, accomplished the independence of the United States. It was the ultimate casting vote. Without French naval superiority at that precise moment, Yorktown wouldn't have happened, and the war might have dragged on very differently.
It's easy to forget, with the drama of Yorktown, that this war was raging elsewhere. Let's pivot to the East Indies, India, a completely different theater, incredibly isolated.
Totally isolated. You have to remember, communication and reinforcement voyages between Europe and India took 4, 5, even 6 months back then. Naval control wasn't just important, it was absolutely vital for survival, especially for the British East India Company fighting local rulers like Hyder Ali of Mysore, who was allied with the French.
And the French sent one of their most capable commanders out there.
They sent arguably their greatest naval commander of the entire era, Pierre-André de Suffren, often called the Baby de Suffren. A man of incredible energy, aggression, and strategic insight. A stark contrast to some of the more cautious French admirals.
And he made his mark even before reaching India, didn't he? At Porto Praya.
Yes, on his way out. His squadron stopped for water in the neutral Portuguese harbor of Porto Praya in the Cape Verde Islands. By chance, a British squadron under Commodore George Johnstone was also there, preparing for an expedition against the Dutch colony at the Cape of Good Hope.
Suffren just attacked them. In a neutral port.
He did. Rules of neutrality apparently didn't constrain Suffren when opportunity knocked. He launched an immediate surprise attack. Tactically, it was messy, indecisive, but strategically, a masterstroke.
How so?
He mauled Johnstone's squadron badly enough and disrupted his expedition so thoroughly that Johnstone was unable to proceed and capture the Cape of Good Hope from the Dutch as planned. Securing the Cape was vital for controlling the sea route to India. Suffren denied the British that key strategic base right at the start. It showed his focus wasn't just on fighting ships, but on controlling strategic geography.
So Suffren arrives in Indian waters. The British commander there is Sir Edward Hughes. What becomes the main strategic prize they fight over?
One location above all others, Trincomalee, on the northeast coast of Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka.
Why was Trincomalee so important?
It possessed the only secure, all-weather harbor on the entire eastern coast of India and Ceylon that could shelter and repair large warships during the dangerous monsoon seasons. If you held Trincomalee, you could keep your fleet operational on the crucial Coromandel coast year-round. If you lost it, you had to retreat hundreds of miles away to Bombay or elsewhere for months, effectively conceding control of the sea.
So Hughes initially held Trincomalee for the British.
Yes, he had captured it from the Dutch earlier. Suffren recognized immediately that retaking Trincomalee was his paramount objective. This led to an extraordinary series of naval battles between Suffren and Hughes throughout 1782, four major fleet actions in February, April, July, and September.
Fierce fighting, often against the odds for Suffren.
Incredibly fierce. Suffren was often outnumbered, or his ships were less well-maintained, his crews less experienced or suffering from disease. Hughes was a stubborn fighter. His British crews were generally better sailors. But Suffren was relentless, always seeking battle, always focused on his strategic goal.
And did he achieve it? Did he get Trincomalee?
He did. After the third battle in July 1782, Hughes had to pull away for repairs. Suffren seized the moment, landed troops, and captured Trincomalee at the end of August. It was a huge strategic coup.
What did that mean for Hughes?
It meant that when the northeast monsoon season arrived in October, Hughes, lacking a safe base on that coast, was forced to withdraw his entire fleet all the way around India to Bombay on the west coast. Suffren, securely based in Trincomalee, had undisputed command of the Bay of Bengal and the Coromandel coast for the next several months.
A massive strategic advantage won through sheer persistence and focus on the objective.
Exactly. Suffren understood naval warfare wasn't just about sinking ships, it was about controlling bases and sea lanes to support the land campaign.
So the final act comes in 1783. Hughes returns from Bombay, reinforced.
Yes, Hughes now has clear numerical superiority. 18 British ships of the line against Suffren's 15. Suffren, meanwhile, is trying to support the French garrison besieged by the British at Cuddalore, south of Madras.
A critical situation for the French on land. Suffren has to intervene.
He has to. But his fleet is desperately short of sailors due to combat losses and disease. So in an almost unprecedented move, he takes about 1,200 French soldiers from the Cuddalore garrison and puts them aboard his warships to help man the guns, a sign of his absolute determination.
So the final battle takes place off Cuddalore on June 20th, 1783.
Suffren, despite being outnumbered, carefully formed his line and bore down methodically on Hughes's fleet. They engaged in a long, close-range cannonade for about 3 hours.
What was the result? Any ships lost?
No ships were taken or sunk on either side. Casualties were roughly equal. Tactically, you might call it a draw, but strategically.
Hughes retreated again.
Hughes broke off the action and withdrew his fleet to Madras. His stated reasons were damage to his ships, a shortage of fresh water, and crucially, having over 1,100 men sick with scurvy.
Scurvy, the classic bane of long sea voyages.
And a sign that Hughes's fleet was operationally strained. Suffren, despite his own difficulties, had essentially fought the superior British fleet to a standstill and forced them to withdraw.
And by forcing Hughes to retreat.
Suffren saved Cuddalore. The British lifted the siege shortly after, partly because news of the preliminary peace treaty in Europe arrived. But Suffren's action was decisive in preserving the French position until that news came.
So the source really holds up Suffren's campaign as an example of
Brilliant generalship overcoming material disadvantages. Suffren's relentless offensive spirit, his focus on strategic bases like Trincomalee, his tactical skill, and his sheer tenacity allowed him to consistently punch above his weight against Hughes, who had better ships and seamen but lacked Suffren's strategic flair. It's a classic case study in the importance of inspired leadership in naval warfare. #outro.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive has really driven home a point that maybe gets lost in standard histories. The American War of Independence, fought across continents and oceans, was profoundly shaped, arguably even decided by what happened on the water.
Absolutely. From tiny gunboats on an inland lake buying crucial weeks of delay,
Arnold on Champlain,
to Lord Howe's brilliant defensive stand using clever tactics and anchored ships at New York,
to the absolute catastrophe for the British when Graves couldn't control the Chesapeake.
and all the way to Suffren's incredible campaign half a world away, demonstrating how vital bases were. It's clear that sea power wasn't just a supporting actor. It often dictated the entire plot.
We saw those recurring patterns too, didn't we? The importance of concentrating your forces, which the British failed to do strategically in 77 and 81.
Leading directly to Saratoga and Yorktown, and the critical need for secure forward operating bases, whether it was Howe defended New York, Suffren fighting tooth and nail for Trincomalee, or D'Estaing's failure, perhaps partly because he lacked a truly secure base near New York.
And running through it all, that human factor, the difference between real leadership, real generalship, as the source calls it,
Like Howe's cool defense or Suffren's relentless drive.
versus tactical rigidity, political infighting, or just plain caution bordering on timidity.
Thinking of Palliser at Ushant, Carket off Martinique, Graves at the Chesapeake, maybe even D'Estaing's hesitation at New York. Moments where superior force perhaps wasn't applied effectively due to failures at the command level.
It makes you think, doesn't it? The source concludes by saying that even if you have the best tools, great ships, skilled sailors' success ultimately depends on the highest talent, on that general ship quality at the very top.
Which raises a fascinating question, especially when you look at how often the combined French and Spanish fleets, which frequently had overwhelming numerical superiority over the British later in the war, failed to achieve decisive results. Think of their attempts against the Channel Fleet or the Siege of Gibraltar.
They had the numbers, but couldn't seem to land the knockout blow.
So the provocative thought maybe to leave you with is this. How often, throughout history, has potentially decisive power been squandered? Not because the tools weren't good enough, but because of internal conflicts, political interference, outdated thinking, or simply a failure of nerve or strategic vision among the leaders.
Something worth considering well beyond this conflict. Well, we hope this deep dive has given you a fresh angle on the American Revolution, highlighting just how critical control of the waves was and how naval actions truly did provide that casting vote.